So, what is your background for my curiosity?
Oh my goodness. Well, how far back do you want to go? That's the problem.
Well, we don't have to go all the way to childhood. Just, I guess, let me put it differently. What have you done, productively for like earning money for the last, I don't know, say 15 years,
Yeah, maybe 30 years or so. But so
maybe.
I'm in the primarily involved in natural gas transportation, trading, and marketing, both on the business side and then more recently in consulting and on the IT side.
Okay, this is awesome. Let me get this. So I had there. It's bothering me. No, that's not it either. It's one of these, a hotel room television there that I just had no noise in the background watching a basketball game, and now it's distracting me.
Yeah,
So, 30 years of uh, natural gas industry.
yeah,
Um,
primarily, primarily on and off, but mostly on and software included in there, consulting.
and does that make you an engineer or?
No, I'm just a business guy, and um, I have a wide range of experience, kind of up and down the value chain.
Okay, no, I hear that. Like listening to some of your recommendations that I've heard you suggest. You've got a bevy of experience and even to me some entrepreneurial knowledge outside of just pure like corporate business. I mean, is that true?
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. I'm always looking at new businesses. I've had a couple small businesses in the past, but really, I would like to try some other things and create something that I could do in like a retirement type role, but not even that really, more like a second or third career type role. Somewhere where I can do the things that I want to do, that I enjoy, and that I'm best positioned to do uh, from my strengths and gifts, and create value in a different way, if at all possible. One that really makes sense for me and for the people that I'm trying to serve.
Yep. I mean, you've described pretty much the exact way that I feel as I go into what I consider uh, the later parts of my career. Is at some point I would really like to leave my current gig and do something exactly as you described. It's not to retire necessarily, but to retire from this to do something else.
Yeah, yeah, and
Uh,
I'm actually enjoying my work right now. I work for a great company, and I have great people to work with. So I don't know that I would ditch it completely, but it might be that I'm just trying to trade up in value, if not economically, then in joy and pleasure of what I'm doing.
mhm. So you've done natural gas trading. Does that mean what does that mean for my edification?
Yep. Well, that's a big long story as well. But back in back in the '90s, the pipelines they used to supply all the gas to your local distribution company that supplies gas to your house or to the power plants. So they were integrated with the producers. They kind of had a stranglehold. There was some uneconomic business going on there. So uh, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee, actually deregulated the pipelines to make them open access so that they could charge a fee to flow on the pipeline, but they couldn't sell gas to anybody. So that left the world open for people who could connect the market to the supply. And that was kind of the birth of natural gas trading and marketing, providing customer service to both the producers and the consumers, being the middleman, but doing all the transportation on the pipelines, doing all the nominations, the communications, the logistics, and then the billing and it's quite an exercise and hedging your exposure. So it kind of became it's a monthly cycle, uh, and then it
I
became
think
more of a daily cycle.
I think you might have just explained my gas bill to me.
Maybe, maybe. Yeah, that's the scratching the surface.
Yeah. And so, but I cut you off just because you were, on all honesty, blowing my mind for a second. I didn't realize that history of gas. but you didn't actually get to. So it goes into the daily thing, and I apologize. But,
No, that's okay. Well, there's a couple of markets for natural gas, and a lot of it, domestic natural gas is tied to the Henry Hub in Louisiana. But it used to be that way because all the production was in the Gulf of Mexico. Over the years with the shale gas, the production has gone to closer to the markets. So
mm,
gas for consumers has stayed, the prices have stayed low, and the supply has become more and more abundant because of the technology, to the point where the United States is actually exporting natural gas, liquefied natural gas, all across the globe. And I worked for one of those companies in the past as well, LNG company. So they would bring LNG to the Gulf of Mexico, liquefy it. So that's a 600 to 1 compression of natural gas to natural gas liquid, and then load it on top of vessels, or loaded in vessels that were just like giant coolers, and
mhm,
transport it across the globe to places that didn't have supply, but they had regasification terminals. So they would dump it into the cooler on shore, and then the company would regasify it and pump it into their distribution system, or at the power plant, or wherever they were going to consume it.
mm.
So that's
So
a
now
fascinating
I'm
business.
curious. Like I love our natural gas stuff because what you described, like winter's gotten less expensive. There's competition. Um, one of my bills that I am able to get the best negotiation with based on competition is my natural gas. So where do you stand on like fracking and I just like in your perspective?
Yeah, well, I don't know of detrimental effects of fracking necessarily. I know of all the benefits of it,
Hmm.
and I can imagine there's costs of remediation, um, environmental quality, and kind of how do you dispose of the wastewater and waste that they use for fracking. But you know, it's pretty tightly regulated, and I think they're incentivized to behave professionally at least. I am concerned somewhat because some of these companies go out of business, they're highly leveraged, and that could cause some issues where they wouldn't have as much concern if they're not actually in business.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I was just more wondering, like your experience, because I've watched, I don't know, I watched the fracking movie, and then I read stuff about it, and I don't have enough knowledge to have an opinion, except for as the consumer, and to me, I like the service I'm getting, so
Well,
uh,
it's kind of hard
the,
to discern, and I'm sure there's some environmental trade-off, and we are all benefiting from the lower prices, that's for certain. And as well as in the power prices, because a lot of power generation at the margin is natural gas fueled.
mm,
And you also have choice in Texas, at least, where you can buy your power from. So there's competition. So prices are actually quite low.
mm-hmm.
So all that money that would be sucked up by your utility bill or by the taxes on your utility bill, you can repurpose that to distribute it,
Yeah.
spend it on what you want to, as opposed to feeding the beast.
No, no, I didn't realize this was your expertise, so this is a really good, a really great actual learning, mm, just discussion for me because, like I said, I'm my favorite natural resource is our natural gas, just because of everything we've talked about so far, and from the consumer perspective, it's easy and competitive, and you know,
Well, I love natural gas at the burner tip. We don't have a natural gas stove right now, but I would love to have one. I'd also like to have
yeah,
a grill out in the back, and we just have the fireplace and then the heat,
yep,
and our power is pretty cheap. But it's pure fuel right there, like it's tangible. There's not a whole lot of loss on the delivery
yep,
side. So with electricity, you have a huge line loss and battery storage, and all that's secondary power anyway because it's derived from some other source.
yep,
And people who are running their electric cars, they don't consider the fact that there's some coal plant out there, or hydro plant, or a gas plant generating that electricity. And really, the wind electricity is an interesting case as well because the wind is blowing in places where people don't live primarily. So the power, sometimes the power goes negative and they have to pay to distribute the power from those
Yep.
plants. And then because it's wind, you don't know when it's going to blow, and so you can't rely on it.
Well, and I mean, I thought, from what I've understood, the reading I've done is like GE's a big wind producer, and they had to get out of it. They're one of those that I think they've, the turbines lost them a bunch of money. It's not a feasible business, and ultimately it's the same thing. You have to create these giant battery systems. There's no storage for it. I mean, and it's an eyesore, and it kills plants, kills birds, and
Well, I think it's not viable without subsidies, and
right, right.
so you're taking money from other productive activities and directing it towards uh, you know cronies, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, well, the picking winners by virtue of government, and
Yeah,
I'm not a massive fan of that. So, well,
central planning.
were you tragedy and hope? Uh, I think I saw in your header file on Discord that you're a tragedy and hope member. So I assume that means that's where you came from. But is that your background
Oh
with
yeah,
Rich?
yeah. I've been a member since ever since the Ultimate History lesson,
Mm,
and I've really benefited from the community over there. And I had actually thought that wouldn't it be nice if everyone could get together and converse like this. So
hmm hmm
I'm just thrilled that he was able to put that together and that we're having the experience that we're having.
Yeah, and then I mean, so I've been how long? Probably about the same time where I think I joined the tragedy and hope community after the ultimate history lesson. Might have been a little before. I can't honestly remember. I'd have to go back and look. Um, but I just felt compelled because I loved the work he was doing to provide resource support in any way that I could. And so I didn't use the community so much. I was more into just making sure I donated some money every month.
Yeah,
um,
yeah, me too.
but this has been great because I see some names that I saw, and it's so interesting to run into people like you that were on there that I didn't know who the audience was. And
Yeah,
so I should have realized that it had to be relatively smart people that could consume that type of information. And it's really refreshing. I can't say that I could be happier than having to be part of this.
yeah. I mean, having the opportunity to have just great conversations with great people, and then getting a chance to kind of interact directly with people who we've listened to for years,
Yeah.
and to be able to participate and contribute, it's fantastic.
And then you have children,
Yeah, I have a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old.
and what are they doing? Like obviously your 17-year-old is high school age, so what are they doing right
Yeah,
this second?
I got one in junior in school, in high school, and then the other one's in college. So yeah, they're pretty traditional.
And then anything that they're your college age student is a boy or girl?
Yeah, he's a boy. Yeah. I mean, he's a very like physical. Uh, he's dyslexic, so he has trouble reading. So he wrestles with it. Um, but he's very like physically talented. He's
Hmm.
um, he's very personable. He's kind of banking on that, but he doesn't have. He knows that he needs to have a better vocabulary. That he has to acquire some more knowledge. That he has to be better spoken. So he's putting some time into reading and trying to improve his communication skills alongside of playing video games and hanging out with his buddies and doing some work, doing some
Yeah,
work
yeah.
actually. Yeah,
20-year-old male life.
yeah. He's got
Well,
a mulch business going. So
good. So I find the dyslexia really interesting. I can totally relate. So uh, my 13-year-old is diagnosed with dyslexia also. How did your son manage through school with the, dyslexia? Because, like, it's not an issue in my eyes, but it does mean that he's gotta approach things differently.
Yeah.
And
Well, I mean, he went to public school and he was still ahead of the people that he was going to school with in the general classes, which was a disappointment because he really didn't learn much. It was just a holding pen. It was kind of
Mhm,
everything that we feel bad about, and it just didn't work out to send him to private school, and there was no way he was going to be homeschooled. So,
mhm,
with number two, we got her into the private school for high school, and it has been probably 10 times better than the public
mhm.
school, but it has its own indoctrination set of things. But she has a pretty good, like, critical thinking, self defense,
Yeah,
and we spent a lot of time researching together, going through the brain model, and she likes that for the most part, which is fun for me. And so I have hopes for her intellectual self defense. Let's put it that way.
that's awesome. Yeah. Well, and we homeschooled just because of dyslexia. Like, I'm really impressed that you guys, were able to help him get through, and he out achieved, uh, a lot of the other kids. We struggled because ours was one that he was falling behind on reading to where the school was making a big deal about it. And so they got him tested. They wanted us to give him drugs, and that just all led to really, they wanted to give him a diagnosis of dyslexia as well as ADD, and that immediately in school leads to drugs. And I just couldn't put him through that, and I couldn't do it. So we just had to find it a different way.
Well, I think
But it's
that's
not.
really
It wasn't I'm happy we did. It's been a great experience, but it was just out of desperation.
well. I think it's kind of courageous that you guys were able to do that and took that step and were able to make it happen. You know, you're going against all the enculturation and indoctrination and probably familial pressure and
Yeah, yeah,
every pressure I could imagine.
yeah. And like I say, it's been fantastic at this point, but it is an immense amount of work, and it does add just to both of our lives. It adds a lot of stress and different struggles. I can't be happier with like what we've come out with kids, but it's I won't lie, it is an all-encompassing challenge. So,
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
uh,
I'm sure it is.
uh, well, I love the brain model. Like, I'm a big user, and I've seen your history brain. I haven't had a chance to peruse it. Just I've tried to engage with class as much as possible while having kids and
Oh
and
yeah,
do all this stuff. So,
having your life.
um, it's very extensive though. So, what kind of tell me your path for getting into that track of the brain model, and in particular history. And
Well, I mean, the history kind of goes back to um, the late '90s, and I think I've told this story before, but I was looking for ways to improve myself and kind of get ahead in life, and so I was um, kind of trying to learn about finances, world events, politics, and I kind of quickly came to the conclusion that it was rigged almost on every piece of it, and that everybody was in front of the line to get paid before me in every event. And then, oh, by the way, I took all the risk. So nobody was with me on the downside. It was only on the upside that everybody was with me. And so I kind of got an education for myself there. And then when 9/11 happened, I immediately said, there's something wrong here. This kind of thing doesn't look right. Those buildings exploded. They didn't fall down. They disappeared. Doesn't seem right. What's going on? So that was kind of stuck with me. And, I was kind of not happy with that. And then, like a year or so, at some point later, I saw the video of Tower 7. I was like, okay, well, for sure, that was not a fire. And if that was able to be achieved on that day after, then it was a pre-planned event because you don't demolish a building in 12 hours, set it up and demolish it in 12 hours. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
happen. There's just absolutely no way. So, um, and then it kind of became an investigation of what are these people capable of? And
Mm.
then it became a realization of they're capable of anything. And um, a lot of things that you think about and know about in one way are not the way they seem. And there's no regard for human life whatsoever at that level. It's just something
Yeah.
else. So it's very immoral and kind of evil. And so that those things kind of prompted me to begin a further investigation and to try to learn. And I felt like I didn't know my own history. Like I didn't know the history of like where I lived, where I came from, or I don't know that you can know like who you are until you know some of those things. And so I kind of got caught up in the Kennedy assassination for a while, and that was my kind of Mae Brussel thing. And so I bought all of her CDs, and I was like, well, if I'm going to listen to these, I'm going to plug it all into the brain model. And
Mm.
uh, like the first set of her tapes, so she was a housewife in the 60s, and she was in California, and she took a look at the assassination, and she said, okay, there's just no way that that happened the way they said it did. So she bought the 25 volumes of the Warren Commission testimony, and then she spent 2 years cross-referencing it. And then she pretty much had figured out what happened after she had done all that work. And then she spent 25 years telling people about it and then investigating fascism in America. And yeah, I mean, she was a little blind to Israel, and she got a little kooky on some of her stuff later and after the 80s or so, or into the 80s. And then she died, like I think she was 66 of a fast acting cancer.
Mm.
They
One of
assassinated her
those.
daughter, and uh,
Yeah.
they they spied on her. So it was she had
Mm.
a relationship with Jim Garrison. So she was a pretty like spunky and fascinating woman. And so that's kind of I learned so many things about current history of the 60s because she was telling it in real time as it occurred. She was reading like 10 newspapers a day and just synthesizing it all. And for a week, she would read the newspapers and then she'd do an hour cassette tape, two sides, and then mail it out. And so,
Mm.
I mean, I just gobbled that stuff up. I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you still have all those?
Oh, yeah, I still have all the CDs and all
Dang
I
it.
burned all the files up on my computer. And
So you have burned them all. So that's one I'll have to see if we can't talk into eventually. I've never listened to them, but that sounds amazing. Like now I'm trying to remember everything you said because that was an amazing little just journey through. So you actually were studying like real, trying to discover real history before 9/11 happened.
yeah, yeah. And then I was a little bit before and then definitely afterwards. Um,
So were you a voter prior to 9/11?
um, Not too much. I mean, I've voted like make every third election or something like that,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
um, I didn't
Yeah. No.
I
No. I
didn't really
mean,
vote
go ahead,
for
Tim. Sorry.
yeah I didn't vote for the Bushes or the Obamas,
Mm.
and then I voted against Hillary last election just because I couldn't take it.
Yeah, I didn't actually vote against her, but I was rooting against her. Like I have to admit, I voted with my dollar. I made like a $50 donation to Trump campaign, and because I wasn't gonna vote, but I'd give a little money, and I can't say that I've only regretted it because I get Trump email and Trump mail and
Oh, I'm
shit like
sure. Yeah.
that. So,
Well, I
uh,
mean, as a puppet show, it's fun, um, and it's like a Punch and Judy show.
yeah,
So there's some entertainment value, and there was a lot of entertainment value for me and him just kicking people in the nuts. I kind of like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
So that was fun, but I'd never expected that anything would ever change because foreign policy is locked up. Maybe has like
yeah.
a 0.5% wiggle room on the domestic policy, but then you got the Congress locked up, which I think I prefer gridlock to
Yeah.
one party rule anyway. So, and
No, no. This might be the greatest thing that's happened is the gridlock here recently. So yeah,
yeah, and I'm not a believer in it, and I'm insulted by it. I'm insulted by mainstream media.
yeah.
I'm told I shouldn't be insulted, that I should just live at a higher level, and I can't help myself sometimes.
Well, for those of us that have, you did an impressive work of discovering history. Well, like I got through 9/11, and I remember where I was on the road for my company at the time, and we were at like we were there. It was a corporate training to where the small team that we were on was all in different meeting rooms. Somebody came in and turned on the TV, and there was the first tower going down, and it was just so shocking because well, I think we saw the plane hit, and then the first tower went down, and it just like you said, it didn't look like it looked like a demolition even that day.
Yeah.
And I still didn't put all of it together. And
Well, it seemed like a psyop to me on that day because every news station had the same information, the same set of words they were using,
fast.
and it just felt contrived. Um,
Yeah.
like, how do they get all those good shots? Like, how are they in place?
Perfect shots all the time, different
Yeah,
panoramic views. Yeah.
didn't okay, it's New York City, so they have people there, but it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. And then you throw the Pentagon on top of that. It's like,
Yeah.
show me the freaking plane, right? Where is the plane? Aluminum nose cone plane doesn't do that. I'm sorry, I can't buy that.
Well, I mean, we could just look at historical, like, well, building collapses and burns, and then historical plane crashes, and there's just no debris. I mean, like you said, an aluminum nose cone that doesn't just disintegrate.
Well, if you think about the mass of those World Trade Center towers, how much mass was in the concrete and steel in that building,
Mhm.
and the fact that it was built from the bottom up to over
Yeah,
overhold its weight, that there's no pancaking. It's not that's impossible. And then you look at the footprint of the collapse or the demolition, and there's no mass. It's all gone. Where did the mass
yeah,
go? Uh, there's no steel. There's no concrete. How,
pulverized to
how did
just
that
what was
happen?
molten left in the bottom.
It's almost like they reduced it to the steel, and everything else disappeared. So that's not a fire and a physical, like, kinetic collapse.
Yep.
Just not possible. So the fact that people still believe that, and that they were able to psyop the world in that big of a fashion is very, very frightening.
Yep.
It's very
Well,
frightening for everyone's future.
we've had a continuous American intervention or, undeclared war ever since. So the war machine's been strong.
Yes, that and loss of civil liberties and more control, more rules, laws, violations, and just creeping technocracy. So, yeah, I try not to like get myself wound up, but it can be kind of a wind up.
No, I understand. I can get worked up over it. What I hate to admit is I had some tax problems where I was young and dumb, and but what I found out was, there's no due process. Like they'll take money and like destroy your family without any warning. So that got me down the path of starting to pay attention to, really taxation is theft. And then the Obama deception came out, and somebody, was a comedian that was talking about it and introduced that to me, and I watched that, and that's what blew my mind. Uh, just because everything that I had seen and hadn't crystallized, that was the one movie that for me, Alex Jones got right.
So,
And
so what was it about the movie? Because I don't think I saw that.
he just explained, if you slowed down and you looked, that, now it's been uh, more than 12 years ago or whatever, because he came out a little before Obama was elected. Um, but that ultimately the money was, I mean, that the policies would be the same. And he did a great job of at that point pointing out, for those of us that were me, so for me, who was still kind of just thinking Republican and Democrat, that the machine was the same.
Yeah.
And it was just his first thing to say, okay, you're getting this Democratic black president, but the policies will be the same as Bush. There's not going to be any difference. And then he was completely right. For all practical purposes, there were some shifts of a few policies, but essentially, like I said, Israel, warmongering, I mean, the drone king.
Surveillance state, lack of civil liberties, all that stuff.
Yeah, yep. None of it got. I mean, it was exactly right. And then the thing that he pointed out to me that I did not realize was he was supported. He pointed out the bankers that support him, and so then you could just see where he was the most well-funded presidential candidate at that point ever. And so once it just put me to looking, and then I got to looking at the 9/11 tapes and the Building 7. I was another one that didn't even realize Building 7 fell until whatever year that was that he got elected. And so I had voted for Clinton the first year, and then maybe a Bush at one point, maybe after the second term of Bush. I was military guy and all. I got suckered into it, and then I haven't voted since. So,
Yeah, I mean,
uh,
we don't know what we don't know until we know it, right?
yep, yep. And I look back and I just laugh, but it's really impressive when you were able to start looking at that history early. It took a couple of drastic events for me to start to realize, but
Well, I was kind of alone in my research and my thoughts, and my wife is kind of aligned with all of this. And I really started reading, like looking for sources of information that I thought were quality. And I liked Ron Paul, and I got reading Lou Rockwell every day. And then I actually subscribed to Gary North for a long time.
mhm,
And I would just go through the articles that made sense to me and find the author and then trace it back to their site and their content, see if they had other authors that made sense to them, and kind of build out a network of viable information. And it's
mhm,
changed over time, but I've just always like tried to increase the quality of the things that I'm consuming. And I might like read a website for 5 years, and then find out that I've been able to upgrade the quality of that information, and I'm able to move on.
move on.
Um,
Yep.
and I've done some of that, and I find it interesting. And now I kind of go back, and the more I learn, the better I get at discerning things. So there
Mhm,
was a Zero Hedge is like a news site, and
mhm.
um, I think that I think increasingly that the content has become more uh, of a psyop, and
Right. Mm.
and I think it always has been, but it did have some alternative, like interesting articles to suck you in, but it became like a little bit of an echo chamber of its own, and it had a slant, and they never get to the core of the matter.
Right.
They never really get to the core of the force, fraud, coercion, and corruption,
Yep. No, they point out just enough that it feels like they're giving no news, but you're exactly right. They've been doing it a long time to where,
yeah,
i
they're drip feeding, right? A little
yeah.
here, a little there. Well, I'm interested. We got this guy's attention. We can suck him into some other things. In the whole, I have a strong interest in the whole psychological warfare business, um, relating to World War II and the OSS and Henry Luce and C.D. Jackson and Edward Bernays. And, they really, after I think World War One, when Bernays saw the value of the propaganda, they had applied it to the enemy,
Hmm.
uh, or the other side of the war. And then they realized how powerful it was, and they just turned the mirror inwards
Mm.
and reflected it back.
Reflected it. Yep.
Yeah, how do we milk these people for everything they're worth?
Right. And so comes the creeping technocracy, and we've really the American people, we, to pluralize it, are definitely some pretty good tax slaves.
Oh,
So, I
like
mean,
like a 50%, right?
oh yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, it just,
I'm
uh,
just a 50% slave.
yeah. And I sit like I was at another corporate dinner tonight, and so there's some of us that are a little older in there. There's some good maturity, good exercise. Yeah, everyone's, it's a big corporation, so it's probably similar to the mix that you experience. But there's these young kids that are really smart. I really appreciate their brains, their drive, their talent to be where they are. Marketing. But they were talking about watching this Netflix show that I'd never heard of, and it's about global warming in essence. And they just went off to where I didn't have the energy to even go into questioning and try to raise issues with it because we're at a dinner table, and yeah, I just didn't have it. But I was horrified to listen to that they really really seem to believe that the world will end in their lifetime if they don't do, if they don't restrict themselves and do all these things that is being suggested on these shows. And
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you find them parroting CNN word for word.
yeah.
And, my whole family, extended family, is all about that. So it's very difficult to spend any time with them.
No, no, and I don't know, it just alarmed me because I'm like, these are actually the kids, and hopefully some of them will grow out of it. But uh, I don't know. I don't know. Well, anyways, I don't want to get sidetracked. It was just on my mind. I needed to express it. Something you said brought it out of me. So,
Yeah. No, I
um,
understand. I can sympathize with that for sure.
well, I'm just curious. So, with your research and listening to all those tapes from the Kennedy assassination, what is your, or what was her hypothesis or her conclusion, and who do you think done it?
Well, I think signs kind of pointed to Frank Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt and a team, an assassination
Right.
team, the Operation 40 team.
Yeah.
And a lot of those people were rewarded with plum jobs in the future. And it was the kind of the Defense Industry Security Commission. They had Walter Dornberg, who was a paperclip Nazi, ran Bell Helicopter, and um, Payne's, Ruth, and I forgot what the guy Payne's name was. They were like his host in Dallas, and um, they were Oswald's host in Dallas. And then when you go to the site and you go to the sixth floor of the book depository, you can plainly see that that's the worst place to set up to take a shot because the car is
The
going away from
angle and
you
the
at a downward angle. And then when you walk down on the plaza, you're like, okay, you could have shot from the railroad bridge, from the grassy knoll, from anywhere in front where the car is coming at you. And the fact that the car stopped tells you that it was just a free fire kill
yeah,
zone.
well, the perfect hesitation after perfect hesitation to where you have the triangulated shooters. So,
Yeah. And
um,
I don't think Oswald was a shooter because of his body language and his statements and the fact that they saw him downstairs having a Coke right after the assassination.
yep.
And,
Well, no, go ahead. Sorry.
well, I mean, if you look at Oswald's history of, well, okay, he was a Marine, he was fluent in Russian. Okay, how do you get that? Then he so called defected to the Soviet Union on a diplomatic airplane through Finland and had passage all the way through. Worked at the Minsk radio factory when Francis Gary Powers was shot down in the U 2 plane. And
Yeah.
he married a Russian oligarch's general's daughter and brought her back to the United States and got a free pass to come back in. And that was funded by somebody. And they got him a job in New Orleans. And he had this cover job of the Free Cuba Foundation in New Orleans.
Right.
I mean, he's obviously a made man actor.
Yeah.
So, and he was set up to be the patsy, and so they whacked him when it turned out that they couldn't whack him at the movie theater. They had one of their mob guys whack him.
Yep. Well, I mean, some of the stuff I've read, also now I can't remember his name. It's not going to come to me right this second, but the guy that killed Che Guevara was also one of the kill teams that was there. I mean, I think they had, like you said, it was the 40 team. There were several kill teams built out across far as what I've read, and it seems credible to me from, whether Fletcher Prouty or I can't remember the researcher that I really like. One of the ones from Tragedy and Hope that I picked up his book, but um, I still am pretty strong on, you know, I feel like definitely CIA involvement and,
Well,
you
George
know,
Bush was there, right? He was there
yeah,
that day.
Bush, yeah, yeah,
He claimed that he was in Tyler, but you can see a picture of him in Daly Plaza.
yeah.
And if you read the
Uh,
history of George H.W.
and
Bush,
he got rewarded ultimately,
that's right,
presidency one day.
head of the CIA and presidency, and oh, the Hinckley just so happened to be connected to the Bush family
Yeah,
when he tried to assassinate Reagan. Probably the only thing that saved him was that they kept him at the Bethesda Naval Hospital and took him to the local hospital. Otherwise,
yeah,
he would just not have made it. Would have been too bad.
yeah. Or they would have put him in a room that was locked away and to just let him die. I mean,
Yeah,
one of those sealed places because they were watching him.
yeah. It's
So.
it's really fascinating, disturbing, disgusting at the same time, and um, you know,
Well,
it's just so contrary to everything that you were ever indoctrinated to believe.
I think what I find interesting is like I do enjoy the Game of Thrones because I feel like it, in its own gory way, is so much representation of true power players, like just the evil banality of those who love power.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, it's difficult, and I think all we can do is try to be examples in the world if at all possible, and spread the word a little bit where we can, and try to find solutions that we can implement and help other people implement.
yep,
And
and just I think it's such a strong reason to just ignore all that stuff. Like I got suckered into hating Hillary too because that's what it was. Is something we brought up earlier. My last little statement is, doing your research, the research I've done on the Clintons are that's just such a mob family of vicious, murdering, power hungry people.
yes,
I just couldn't help but root against her. And,
well, how corrupt are they? And then how come she's not in jail with the email
yeah,
server? And there's no evidence of Trump doing anything with Russia, but they have all of her emails and
yeah,
all of their State Department emails. And oh, by the way, they sold Russia the uranium mine.
yes,
So
yes.
they must not be that evil, right?
Right.
Yeah,
And always, hey, that's gonna get me off on my side, right? But ultimately, that just to be ignored. I'm just saying, I have such a hate on for the Clintons. I was so,
well, it's kind of fun to do the body count and then the MENA investigation.
yep,
And what was really fun for me and illuminating was sucking out all the donators to the Clinton Foundation from their website and putting it in the brain model and then cross-referencing with everybody. I
that's something you should. I'd love it if you would share to sometime just so we can look at it.
I really
Um,
enjoyed that.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, no, I mean it's just a map of corruption. It's
Crap, yeah.
just a map.
Just take the picture, the screen capture to share out.
Yes,
I
but there's
have
so
a.
many that I just can't get it on one screen capture. Right? It's like
Oh,
it goes from $25 million down to $500 or something like
yeah. I actually have a site in, so what we do, I sell medical equipment, so we go show off our equipment at certain places. At the University of Arkansas Medical Center has one of my pieces of equipment, as well as a place called Carti. It's Central Arkansas radiation therapy something.
that. Yeah,
And so we go and we stay overnight. But if you bring up the Clinton, I mean, there's Clinton stuff everywhere around but they're just thought of as crooks and criminals by
Yeah. Anybody
everyone
who
in
knows
Little
them.
Rock.
Yeah. Well, we went to visit University of Arkansas, so we were probably 30 miles from Mina, and we were back in, it was very strange up in the mountains up there. There were no
Yeah.
people. It was way, way, way out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I was watching for the aliens to come down and abduct us, and dueling
Yeah,
banjos were playing on the
some
radio.
aliens.
Yeah. And we stayed at a hotel in Fayetteville, and right down the street, I went for a jog. I like to do a jog to kind of see the town, do like a
Mhm.
3 or 4 mile loop, and that allows me to see a lot of different things that I wouldn't see and kind of get a feel for the land in any city that I visit. And I jogged past the Rose Law Firm, and I'm like, oh yeah, we are in Arkansas.
Nice. Yes. That's well. We whenever I take clients there, we stay at a hotel right near the Clinton Library. So,
Oh.
it's funny coming out of like Georgia. I always invite them to go see the Clinton Library. Never, no one ever takes me out, but
So Georgia's an interesting place. Like I lived in Atlanta for a while when I got out of college, and um, they have pretty high taxes from what I can
Mhm.
tell, and it seems very liberal for southern state. Um,
Well, it's sort of the perfect red state. It's a big red state with a big chewy blue spot in the middle.
Blue dot, yeah.
So, it's not necessarily great on like I'm a gun nut, and so to me it's good property rights, good gun rights. But yes, bad taxes, and they do have a tendency to be dangerous because of the Atlanta you know, politics. But you get outside of it, and like I've got a hunting lease, and the old farmer down there, he'll run the sheriff off in a heartbeat. Like he tells us to go hunt deer at night with the light because he's like, fuck those guys.
So, yeah, I'd love to come over there and do some hunting with you. We do a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
hunting out here in Texas, and the gun uh, laws are fairly decent here, and of course I'm armed to the teeth, so I love that.
Yeah, yeah. No, we definitely we get through this first session. We'll just have to plan it out. We get into heavy hunting right around in the holiday season. So here the prime deer season is that November December months,
Yeah,
and just take a weekend. And I've got it's just a little try bring blankets and do air mattresses. I've got a little trailer that sleep like six people or whatever,
yeah,
and we just hang out and talk shit and go shoot things,
that's the
and
good
it's
life.
a good time, man.
Yeah, that's the good life.
Um,
We have a
eh,
guy. Our guy is in Centerville, which is halfway between here and Dallas, and he's an old aerospace engineer who retired, bought some property, and he runs a hog hunting ranch. And he
right.
has they have deer, and he has a like an 2 acres with a cabin on it, and then 110 acres fenced. And
Oh yeah.
so he has a gun range in the back of the cabin. He has a covered
That's nice.
portico where we can clean the hogs or deer, whatever you shoot.
Yep.
And we do skeet shooting. We do like a stalk hunt or a blind hunt, and yeah, so it's just total all hands on deck freedom. And he wanted to meet me and my son uh, for lunch before we went hunting the one time. So we met him in the neighboring town. He shows up and he's got his boots on and his hat, and he's got a vest on, and he's got his 45 under his vest. And I'm like, this is the way it should be.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. No, no. It's I mean, that's what's fun in the rural areas because, like, yes, Georgia, Atlanta is very liberal, but you get out there, you have to have a license to open carry in Georgia. But once you get out in the boonies, like especially that time of year, just everybody is just flat out on the hip. It's the
yeah,
45 on the hip, and I love it because yes, it's very like the cops are respectful down there, especially the old farmers. They just don't mess with them.
yeah,
It's just understood. These are people that still believe they own their own property, and no
yeah.
one's gonna
That's
mess.
right. They own themselves, more
Yep.
importantly. Yeah,
and they wouldn't even think of themselves like libertarian. They're just like, this has been the family for longer than you've been around here, boy, and this is my land.
that's right. They're just people.
Yeah. So,
That's good
well,
stuff.
I really appreciate all this. Is there, is there anything you'd like to say about the autonomy course?
Well, you know, not much more than what we've already said, really, that it's a great opportunity to converse and reach out to like-minded people. And there's a lot of diversity in the class, which I find very entertaining and interesting.
Mhm.
A lot of eclectic opinions and beliefs, and there's nothing really out of bounds, which is very nice.
Yep.
The good part is we all kind of come from the same uh, background as far as freedom goes, and the non-aggression principle, and respecting others, and property rights, and having a having great conversations, and just the ability to talk through some of the concepts and get different perspectives that make sense. I've learned a tremendous amount. It's given me a lot of ideas on how I want to go forward with my
Yep.
other business ventures and other skills that I want to pursue. And I just appreciate the opportunity to share that with other people and go through this experience with you and the rest of the crew.
Yep. Yep. I mean, I totally second that. It's been awesome, and the fun is if we can disagree. Like I've disagreed a couple times with some people, but we can do it and still, like you said, it's ultimately respectful, and we can have our discussion, and maybe we figure it out, maybe we don't. There's no real negative, and it's been great.
Bring your evidence and then we can agree or disagree.
Yep. Yep.
Good stuff. Well, thank you for reaching out, Martin. It's nice to spend the time with
Yeah, no, and I thank you for putting up with my, weak camera and everything. We'll see if
you.
one of our the recordings came out, but this was great. I really, really enjoyed it. So thank you, Tim, and hopefully we'll do it again.
All right. Thanks a lot, Martin. We'll see
We'll
you.
keep chatting, and I definitely, it's most fun when we get somebody out there that is just we go hang out and get somebody new in the mix and go hopefully get a deer. Mostly
Oh,
just
yeah. Yeah. That'd
hang
be
out
fun.
and do you know outdoor stuff.
That's
So,
right. Yeah. Do manly stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
All right,
Martin.
man. Well,
Take
thank you,
care.
Tim.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.